The hive had 60,000 bees in it 2 weeks prior. The frames were solid. Brood in all stages, wall-to-wall coverage, stores building in the supers above. The beekeeper closed it satisfied. There was nothing wrong. Nothing that showed on a frame. 2 weeks later, a hollow shell. A few hundred bees clustered in the corner of an empty box. Whatever honey had been stored was gone, plundered clean. The colony was finished, and the beekeeper had no explanation, because at every inspection everything had looked fine. The brood was fine, the queen was fine, the stores were fine. Everything was happening somewhere. The inspections never looked. There is a habit that modern beekeeping developed gradually across the 20th century, and is now so embedded that most beekeepers don't question it. When something concerns you about a colony, you open it. You pull frames, you assess the queen's laying rate, the brood pattern, the state of the stores, whether disease signs are present. These are the right questions. The frames hold real information, but the information they hold is about the interior condition of the colony, what was biologically true inside the hive over the past several days and weeks, as processes completed their cycles. A frame of capped brood tells you what the queen was doing 3 weeks ago. A frame showing good honey stores tells you what foragers brought in across the past month. The frames are a record, an accurate record, but a record of what was. The entrance is live. What's happening there is happening right now. And there is a class of problem that never shows on a frame until the damage is irreversible. Those problems show up at the entrance first. They show up at the entrance days before they register on anything inside the hive. Late June is when this distinction carries the highest consequence of any point in the season. And it's the time of year when most beekeepers are least trained to read what the entrance is saying. The beekeepers working commercial apiaries in Ohio and Indiana in the 1880s and 1890s did not open a hive as their first diagnostic move. They stood outside it first. They watched. 2 minutes, sometimes longer, before reaching for anything. Moses Quinby, whose practical beekeeping writing shaped American apiary management in the years after the Civil War, described entrance observation as the starting point of any competent apiary visit. AI, Root, in the early editions of the ABC and XYZ of bee culture, documented what experienced beekeepers of his era called reading the door. Not the frames, the door, the entrance. What was happening there, who was coming and going, how they were moving and why, before the cover was ever lifted. The entrance, to a beekeeper who understood what was being communicated, told you things about the colony's condition in its surrounding environment that no frame inspection could reveal. Because the frames tell you about the inside, the entrance tells you how the colony is doing out there, in relation to the forage, in relation to neighbouring colonies, in relation to pressures building in the ecosystem around it. That observational tradition largely faded when frame inspection became the dominant diagnostic practice through the early 20th century. The frames became primary. The entrance became something beekeepers glanced at on the way to the tool, if they thought about it at all. And with that shift, a category of information was quietly deprioritized. The information is still there. The entrance is still giving it, every day, every visit. Most beekeepers have simply stopped knowing what they're looking at. There is a specific combination of behaviours at the entrance in late June that experienced commercial beekeepers in the 1880s documented as a reliable early warning signal, a reading that preceded colony collapse during dearth by days in some cases and a week in others. It doesn't look like an emergency. The colony is still flying. Bees are still moving in and out. But something specific in how they're moving is telling you that this hive is under a pressure it may not be able to resist on its own. I'll come to what that combination looks like exactly. First though, it helps to understand what changes at the entrance when the dearth arrives, because those changes don't all announce themselves the same way. If the idea of reading a hive through observation rather than intervention resonates with how you think about your colonies, a like or a comment helps other beekeepers find this kind of content. In a colony at peak nectar flow, the entrance operates under an economy of abundance. Foragers depart in high numbers from first light. They return loaded, and the turnover at the entrance is continuous and efficient. Guard bees are present, but not under pressure. The colony's primary behavioral attention is inward, processing incoming nectar, curing honey, feeding brood, building comb. Defense is secondary because the biological conditions that heighten defensive sensitivity haven't arrived. The colony is expanding. Its stores are growing. The guard system is set at a low threshold. When the primary flow ends, that economy shifts. Incoming nectar volume drops. The colony's stores stop growing at the rate they were. The forager to non-forager ratio inside the hive begins to change. And the guard bee system, which is not a fixed number of bees posted at the entrance, but a dynamic, threshold-driven recruitment cascade, responds. Guard presence at the entrance increases. Not dramatically, not in a way that reads as alarming from a distance, but the number of bees stationed at and around the entrance rises, and the threshold for recruiting additional guards drops. A colony that posted 3 or 4 guard bees during the peak flow begins posting 8, 10, sometimes more. It's responding to a biological signal the colony itself is generating. Incoming nectar has declined, stores are no longer growing actively, and the instruction to protect what exists has become more urgent than the instruction to go and gather more. This is normal late June colony behavior. A colony showing elevated guard presence at the entrance as the dearth arrives is responding correctly. What separates normal dearth response from early crisis is a second signal that appears alongside the guard escalation, and that second signal is not in how many bees are at the entrance, it's in how some of them are moving. This is where the skill of entrance reading actually lives, and it's where a beekeeper who stands outside for 3 minutes sees something that cannot be found on any frame. Legitimate foragers returning to a hive know exactly where they are. They've done this flight hundreds of times. They approach on a direct line, land clean at the entrance, and move inside without hesitation. A bee that has foraged from this colony for weeks is oriented to it completely. Her approach reflects that orientation. Direct, confident, no hesitation at the landing board. A robbing scout from another colony does not have that orientation. The hive she's approaching is unfamiliar. She doesn't know its entrance layout, she doesn't know its defensive strength, and she's assessing it before committing to anything. Her approach comes in from the side rather than the direct line. She hovers before landing, sometimes more than once. She touches the landing board and lifts off again. She walks along the entrance edge, antennae active, before moving partially inside and retreating back to the air. Her abdomen, when she does land, is held low and close to the surface, in a posture measurably different from the upright stance of the returning forager. She is reading the defense. This behavior was noted in working notes from Ohio commercial beekeeping operations in the 1880s, with a descriptive name, the wasp walk. Not because robbing bees resemble wasps, but because the movement, the tentative, investigative lateral approach, and entrance probing had a quality that reminded practical beekeepers of how a wasp approaches unfamiliar territory. The term didn't survive into modern beekeeping literature. The behavior it described has not changed. When you see that approach flight mixed into the otherwise normal activity at the entrance in late June, hovering before landing, side door testing, the low abdomen investigative posture alongside the direct confident returns of legitimate foragers, you are seeing early robbing pressure, not active robbing, not collapse. The scout colony has not committed yet. Its scouts are probing, assessing whether this colony's defense can be overcome, whether it's worth sending a robbing force. That decision has not been made. The window for intervention is still open. There is a second entrance signal in late June that requires no particular visual skill to identify. It requires only that you pay attention to one specific thing when you watch returning bees. Pollen. Fallen everything. One of these seen and there's everything dewide. Fallen everything, Fallen everything feels to Bluestronstein Kiltarn. Fallen everything. A healthy colony with an active brood nest brings in pollen even in early dearth. Even as nectar sources taper, pollen sources remain active through much of June in most of the eastern and central United States. Wild clovers in disturbed ground. Basswood if you're in the right latitude. Early goldenrod in some regions. A colony with brood to support sends foragers for pollen because the nurse bees require it. Some percentage of returning bees will be carrying visible pollen loads in their corbiculae. When pollen intake drops to near zero on days with good flying weather, something has changed. The brood nest may have contracted significantly, which is worth knowing. The forager workforce may be compromised in ways not yet visible inside, which is urgently worth knowing, or the entrance is under enough robbing pressure that legitimate forager departure and return has been disrupted, which is critically worth knowing. No frame inspection in the early stages of any of these situations will confirm a crisis. The brood you're looking at was laid before the disruption. The honey stores you're assessing accumulated before the pressure began. The frames look fine because they're showing you what was true 2 and 3 weeks ago. When pollen stops coming in during active flying weather, the clock has started. Here is the specific combination that the Ohio and Indiana commercial beekeepers of the 1880s and 1890s documented as the reading that called for immediate action. Not any single signal. The convergence of 3. Active flight at the entrance. More movement than a dearth period would normally generate for this colony at this time of day. Approach flights that include the hovering, lateral, investigative pattern of scouts alongside the direct returns of legitimate foragers. Guard bees elevated beyond the normal dearth response level, with active antenna engagement, bodies oriented outward, bees moving with an agitation different from the settled posture of guards, simply stationed at rest, and pollen intake at or near zero on a clear morning with suitable flying weather, when legitimate foragers with an intact departure lane would be working available sources. Those 3 signals together, present simultaneously on a late June morning, tell you that robbing scouts have found this colony, are actively probing its defences, and that the defence is under a level of stress it is working to sustain. The pollen foragers are not getting clean departure lanes because the entrance is contested. The guards are being asked to manage a threat at the same time as legitimate traffic, and the threshold of that defensive system is being tested. This specific convergence was documented in Indiana working records from the 1890s as the reading that called for entrance reduction the same afternoon. Not at the next inspection, not after one more look. The same afternoon, a narrowed entrance, reduced to 2 or 3 inches, changes the geometry of the problem in a way the colony can manage. A wide bottom board entrance during dearth asks guard bees to defend a front several inches across. A reduced entrance asks them to defend 2 or 3. That is a task calibrated to the colony's capacity. The wide entrance during early robbing pressure may not be. No frame inspection at this stage confirms the problem. The frames are fine, and the frames will remain fine until the robbing force escalates past the colony's defensive threshold. That escalation can happen in hours. A colony that loses the entrance to an organised robbing force during dearth can lose its honey stores in 24 to 48 hours. When that collapse begins, it is visible and unmistakable. But the reading that could have prevented it was available days earlier. Outside the hive, in the convergence of signals that looked, individually, like nothing much worth stopping for. If this kind of biology first, observation-based management connects with how you're approaching your apiary. Subscribing keeps this content coming. There's one more entrance signal in late June that deserves specific attention because it's the one most commonly misread, and misreading it consistently costs beekeepers time they don't have. Fanning. Fanning, fanning. With me for fanning prostrarefer. With me for na forfi sorbor, with panning for poor. Bees fanning at the entrance in summer is common enough that most beekeepers register it as normal and move past it. In July and August, on hot afternoons, entrance fanning is exactly what it looks like. Temperature management, moisture expulsion from ripening honey, ventilation, normal colony operation. In late June, particularly in the early morning, before ambient temperatures have climbed, active fanning carries different information. The colony isn't managing heat that hasn't arrived yet. Watch the direction of the fanning before you read the behaviour. Bees positioned at the entrance edge, with abdomen slightly raised and wings driving air inward into the hive. Ventilation, normal operation. Bees positioned similarly but fanning air outward, away from the entrance, particularly in the early morning hours when temperature is not the driving factor, and particularly when this fanning is accompanied by the elevated antenna activity and agitation described earlier. The colony is in a disrupted state at its entrance. A colony under robbing pressure fans defensively. It's dispersing alarm pheromone outward, broadcasting a signal to its own foragers that the entrance is contested. The fanning is not moving air for climate control. It's communication. The colony is telling its returning bees, something is wrong here. The returning legitimate forager encounters that pheromone at the entrance and often hesitates, lands and lifts off again, approaches from multiple angles before committing to entry. She is reading the same signal you are if you're paying attention. The entrance is disrupted. Something is probing it. That defensive fanning, outward directed, in the cool of a late June morning, alongside the other signals, is the colony telling you what no frame inside it can confirm. The practical protocol is not complicated. Before any hive inspection in late June, spend 3 minutes at the entrance. Position yourself to the side of the flight path, not in it. Watch the return approaches. Is there a mix of direct, confident returns and the hovering side approach pattern of scouts? Count the guard bees roughly. Are they elevated above what you've seen in prior weeks? Are they agitated, antennae active, or settled? Is pollen coming in at all? If bees are fanning, what direction is the airflow moving? 3 minutes before the tool comes out. If everything reads as normal late season activity, proceed to your inspection with that context. If the convergent signals are present, proceed to your inspection knowing what to look for. Not disease, not brood quality, but whether stores are intact, whether the colony feels its normal weight. Then reduce the entrance before you leave. 2 or 3 inches. Come back in 24 hours and watch the entrance again. Most beekeepers have lost a colony this way. Not a weak one. A strong colony, one that inspected well, one that didn't seem to need anything. The entrance had been giving information for days. Nobody was standing outside long enough to receive it. The habit that Quinby documented in the 1860s and Root recorded in his early editions wasn't a complicated practice. It was a prior practice. It happened before the hive was opened, not instead of opening it. The entrance first, the frames second. Let the outside tell you what the inside is dealing with before you go inside to confirm it. Late June is when that habit does its most important work. The flow is ending. The dearth is beginning. The colony's behavioural economy is shifting from growth to defence. And every signal of that shift, every indication of how well the defence is holding, announces itself at the entrance first and inside the hive weeks later, when the opportunity to intervene has already closed. The question worth sitting with when you walk to your hives this time of year: how long do you stand outside before you reach for the hive tool? If this kind of observational, historically grounded approach changes how you're reading your colonies, subscribe. There is more ahead, more forgotten precision, the kind that develops from watching before opening and from knowing what you're looking at when you do.